is all decked up to host the mega G20 Summit, the preparations for which began almost last year with a series of events culminating now with the final countdown. Lots is at stake for the Modi government. Of course, he'll try and leverage this big event for the domestic political purposes because, of course, the elections are on the corner in 2024. But at the same time, the Prime Minister is trying to project India as the major voice of the global South. But given the inherent contradictions vis-a-vis the Ukraine conflict, the inner discord within the countries, say with the groupings of G7, then you have G20, then you have the BRIC nations. So many contradictions are there. The million-dollar question which everybody is asking is that can India extract a concrete resolution at the end of this summit? Joining me now is a very special panel today. We have former Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia and former Ambassador Vinod Kumar. Thank you, both of you, for joining the show. And we have two veteran journalists who've covered international politics a lot. One is Anand Sahai with us. Thank you, sir, so much for joining. And we have K.S. Dakshinmurthy, who's also the managing editor for the Federal. But yes, he's also an international expert too. Thank you so much, Dakshin, for joining. And let me begin with Ambassador Bhatia. What are we really going to achieve at the end of this summit, if I may ask you?
The simple, direct question on a very complex subject. I will try to be as direct and as brief as possible because we have indeed stellar panel members here. I think G20 is one of the most consequential multilateral groupings that the world has today. And it is India's great honor and privilege to conduct the presidency for full 12 months. And then as part of that presidency, to do the ultimate India moment, which is the summit from 9th to 10th September. This is the 18th summit. This is the first time India is hosting it. And India has very clear objectives and priorities for this summit. Seeing purely in diplomatic terms, we can say that this is showcasing India's development with the democracy model. It is also showcasing India's proactive international diplomacy. And above all, it is demonstrating India's claim to be a global leader, which is on its way to becoming a leading power in the world. By all this, what I mean is India wants to contribute to the resolution of the global challenges that the world faces today. The entire theme of G20 is basically by India to convey to the world that yes, indeed, while there are divisions and differences among the countries, there is a serious polarization, there is strategic contestation, there are conflicts going on. Yet, if mankind wants to move towards peace and prosperity, it has no choice but to take a united stand. So in that context, finally, we are now into the wee hours, so to say, or very late hours, when our negotiators are battling on every paragraph, every line, every word, to be able to declare, to be able to succeed in producing Delhi Declaration or New Delhi Declaration. Whether they will be able to pull it off is something that we need to watch carefully.
Okay, let me come to Ambassador Vinod Kumar now. Sir, this G20 summit is almost like a spectacle, but when you talk about other nations who have hosted the G20 summits, for them it has been like a routine event. Now, do you think that India is trying to make some sort of a difference by making this event into some sort of a mega event? And how would this G20 summit in India really be different from the previous ones which have been held?
I think one thing that India has been trying during its presidency of G20 is to evolve this G20 process not only as a government controlled and government-led process, but also involving businesses, involving the civil society, involving women, So we have these different other events that have taken place alongside the main G20 events. And I think the biggest success for India would be that if we see in the over the summit period that the G20 has actually become a 20-member international organization that is focused on the economy, the global economy, focused on development banking, focused on other issues which are relevant to both developed and developing countries. And for instance, if I give one example, if there is a consensus that African Union should also be a part of G20, I think that would be a major achievement. So I think these are some of the areas where perhaps we are looking for some concrete outcomes. And it should not become an institution that has G7 plus one, the European Union and the other members on the other side, but rather it should be a cohesive multilateral organization. It sprang from the economic crisis of 1997 as finance ministers meeting, later in 2008 as summit. And so it's, in my view, its main focus should be economic and development issues, which are relevant both to developed world and the developing world.
Right. Before we get into the inherent contradictions and what are the sticky points, which have to be hammered, Anand, if I may come to you about the losing relevance of G20. Now, is this G20 grouping also losing its relevance somewhere, given the fact that smaller groups are being formed? And so what is really the future of G20? That is also another question which everyone is asking.
I hope we are not losing its relevance. G20 was created, the first summit was held in 2008 to deal with the huge financial crisis that the world faced at that time. It had the important economies, not necessarily the biggest, because a country like India, today, even today, with a per capita GDP of $2,600 only per annum. It is not a part of the rich countries club. And yet India's weight goes beyond that. In fact, from the time India became independent, 75 years ago, we've always had a weight on account of what we gave to the world in terms of ideas, even though we were a much poorer nation then. But today, G20, I think, is the preeminent world forum to deal with international crisis on the economic side. There's no question about that. Today, the situation is far more grave than it has been for many years. Post-pandemic, post-2019 pandemic, most countries of the world are in the grip of a serious debt crisis. There is food crisis, there is energy crisis. So if the big powers, big countries of the world, leading countries of the world do not get together today to deal with some of these issues, then when? That is the problem. That's one thing. On the other hand, this period has also coincided with the biggest geopolitical fracture that we have seen since the end of Cold War I. Are we already in Cold War II? Look at the manner in which the Ukraine issue is holding up
Absolutely.
the joint declaration. I still remain cautiously optimistic. I hope the Western nations will not insist on the formulation that was accepted in Bali in November last year, where the Russian Federation side of the story did not get a look in. I hope that doesn't happen. But apart from this Ukraine crisis, bedeviling international conversations, let's not forget that when leaders at the topmost level meet, they also are influenced by geopolitics. They talk geopolitics. They're not discussing gardening and cleaning drains and running the taps and switching on the lights. Others have done that, or the banking sector or rural banking, things like that. Those are very important things. But those have been dealt with earlier. Ground has been prepared. There are larger issues at play now. In this situation, the role of China, I think that is going to be another difficult patch in the discussions to deal with. The Chinese president has not come here for the summit. It is not only to, cock a snook at the US. He's due in America, down the line. And he wants to skip meeting Joe Biden because he's trying to refurbish his own negotiating stance. That was one part of their agenda as far as I can see. The other was to show India down. And in case there is no joint statement, it will be a pity, but while it may not completely, override the glossy picture of these summits that we have tried to draw in the domestic sphere, like the way the discourse has run for the past 1 year almost. G20 is happening as though the Garden of Eden has arrived, and that we are the center of international attention. For God's sake, that is simply not true. With $2,600 a year per capita GDP, you have only very limited intervention powers in the world of economy and finance and trade. And therefore, but you have other strengths. Digital India, we have experience of, rural side. These things we can certainly share our experiences with other countries which are in need. But then we have to not only wax eloquent, we have to adopt a more reasonable stand, which links with what India is, what Indians are. And let me tell you, as far as the optics go, I am disappointed. I'm disappointed. And New Delhi has been barricaded almost. You've got set times, you can't go into the metro, you can't do this, you can't do that. I mean, many of us have seen the hosting of the 1983 NAM Summit, the 7th NAM Summit.
Absolutely.
I was present. I had just come back from a reporting stint in the northeastern part of the country, in Assam, seeing the Nelly massacre and seeing what was happening in the city of Guwahati and Dispur, the state capital. I felt in Delhi, the security for more than 100 international guests, which included people like Fidel Castro and Arafat. Still, it didn't seem oppressive. Today, the cities are like a blanket, practically a blanket, no matter what the police department may go on saying that, no, things are back to normal and so on. But those who live in Delhi, they realize that things look very different. We are out to, apart from the discussions themselves, we are out to lay down the red carpet to the extent of heavy duty silver cutlery and so on. I mean, it hurts me to see all that. We are still a country which aspires to do much better on the economic side, to raise the standards of life of our people. We are coming off a COVID situation, which has impacted the whole world very badly. We have still not got back to the pre-COVID financial economic situation.
Right.
Why are we doing this?
Right.
You could have
We have
done
answers to that, Anandji. We have all answers to that.
Yeah,
No.
I'll come to you.
I'm not
I'll
saying
come
you
to you,
don't.
Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia. I'll
I'm
come
not
to
saying
you.
you don't. That's Rajiv, that's your perception. And thank you. I'm very eager to hear them. But
I'll come to you, sir. I'll come to you.
yeah. So I think, but I hope that in sum, on balance, there can be a way found. I hope it will not end up only with a chairman's statement. I think our foreign minister is working at it. I really, from the bottom of my heart, I wish him very well, because I would not want, for reasons of international geopolitics, our regional politics vis-a-vis China. I wouldn't want this to be remembered as the one summit where we could not come to a collective understanding on on shaping language, which will see developmental activity for all of us, the global South. And global South does not stand in isolation. It stands in relation to the global North. So we have to work at that. Thank you.
Right. I'll come back to you, but Dakshin, the points which were mentioned by Anand, they are very crucial points. And that, also brings me to the question about the financial part of it, that what was the need to spend so much of money on a summit like this? What is Modi achieving at the end of the day? Of course, in reference to what happened during the NAM summit, that was also one summit which the government of that time held. But how is this summit different, and what is Modi really achieving at the end of this summit? I mean, will he have lots to say at the global platform? Will he have lots to take back for the domestic audience? Of course, the electoral compulsions are there, but how is Modi really looking at? I want to really understand Modi's perspective from the point of view of this particular summit. Yes.
See, it's always been clear right from the time India took over from Indonesia last year that the Modi government is going to optimize the position that it finds itself in. Because if you look at the G20 and the presidency, it's basically a rotating presidency. It's fundamentally an administrative job, and it moves from one country to another because it doesn't have a permanent headquarters. And it's more like a practical situation. So you have the past president, the current president, and the incoming president, the three countries put together, they run the secretariat fundamentally. So that's how it works. So it just turned out that it was India's turn. And also some people say that India also kind of lobbied a bit to get the presidency this particular year for this term. So for Modi, it's more than just being the president of G20, because if you look at the BJP and particularly Prime Minister Modi, he's always aspired to be a world leader. He's not been very content with just being the Indian Prime Minister. So this gives a great opportunity for him. And he has gone the entire hog, because all said and done, for instance, the Delhi summit itself shows that the entire world will converge on Delhi. Whatever the weightage of that particular presidency, the fact is that on Saturday and Sunday, the world's attention will be on Delhi, and Modi will strut on the world stage. I mean, whatever that is. So he would like to make the most of it, because let's not forget that Prime Minister Modi is, after all, an elected politician. And he would like to continue to be where he is, and if not in a better position. So he would see the G20 as a very good opportunity to do a few things at the same time. Number one, to push India, into some kind of a prominent position. Number two, to help his own government to continue maybe in the next term, and also to make it a event worth remembering. So all these things put together, they've just gone the entire, they've just gone completely taken, let's say, in some ways, Delhiites by storm. Thankfully, I'm in Bangalore, so I don't see what's happening there. But from whatever I'm seeing, so Delhi is completely swept away by this whole, summit. But, sorry. What I also want to add is that what India is doing as a country is quite different from what the other countries did during their summits when they were the president. So what it also goes to show is that if you look at this G20, the group itself, it is a group, no doubt. They all are on the same platform, but each country wants to see what it can get out of the G20 rather than putting something into the G20. So I would really look at it that way. So though it's a group, apparently together, each one has its own agenda, right? From China, Russia, you have US, you have the UK, and India, of course. So each one is there to get something out of it. I mean, this is a sad thing to be saying. But unfortunately, the very fact that people can't sit together, can't thrash out a kind of a understanding. For instance, you have Russia in the group, you have the US in the group, which is now for all practical purposes backing Ukraine in the war. They can't, there is no opportunity, or they don't want to sit and meet each other and talk to each other. So it basically means that there is a severe limitation to this group itself.
Right.
So, I would say that we must look at it from that point of view. In what it will achieve.
That's quite a significant point. And Ambassador Bhatia, if I may come to you now, and coming back to the resolution bit, also on what Anand said, how difficult will a resolution be given the inherent contradictions? And what if there is a repeat of what happened in Bali, where you would just have a summary statement of the chairman and the countries don't arrive at a consensus, there's no resolution. What happens then? Now, the kind of hype which has been given to this summit, will things not backfire for India?
There is a factual flaw in your question, with due respect. There was no chairman's summary in Bali. There was a full-scale Bali declaration, which came out of the consensus among all the countries. So before I very briefly pinpoint as to what is the likely outcome here in Delhi, I should point out, I think for the sake of clarity, that indeed there are domestic political aspects of G20, and obviously our illustrious panelists with years and years of journalism are in a better position to address, and they already have done so. I think our expertise relates to the world of diplomacy, and I would like to particularly highlight my views there. And so I would just make one central point that there is no doubt that multilateral institutions are in some kind of a crisis. With so many things happening, we hear so little of UN these days. We hear so little of the contribution of UN Security Council, for example, to resolve the Ukraine conflict. So in that kind of situation, G20 is still one of the more consequential institutions, which I pointed out right at the outset. The very fact that people which are contending parties, even warring parties, are able to sit around a table of G20 is the best indicator of the efficacy of G20. Where would Mr. Lavrov have a chance to rub shoulders with President Biden if there is no G20? Therefore, that is important on its own. Even given the vexed relationship between India and China, we must remember that China is not boycotting G20. All that has happened is that China is not being represented by its president, but by its premier, and you know the views expressed by our foreign minister on this subject. Now, if you would allow me just 1.5 minutes to speak about the likely outcome.
Go ahead.
I think some of us have done a very careful calculation. There are only 3 possible outcomes, that we will get to know on 10th. Full success, 2nd, partial success, 3, complete failure. As far as I'm concerned, based on my study of G20 for the past 10 to 15 years, I can say that the complete failure is ruled out. That leaves us with only 2 options, success or partial success. Success will be indicated if we are able to get a full New Delhi declaration, a joint communique, which is acceptable to all the members and which is substantive enough for experts to claim that it is a progress on Bali declaration. On the other hand, it would be a partial success if due to the difficult positions created by Russia and China, consensus evades the negotiators, and we end up with the chairman's summary and outcome document. That is the name of the alternative document. At this stage, I think those of us who are outside the conference room, it's very difficult to predict. At best, we can intelligently speculate, or we can cite those who are inside the conference room. As you know, people such as Amitabh Kant and Dr. S. Jaishankar, Foreign Minister, they are continuously claiming, as they should, that they are hopeful that there would be a New Delhi declaration based on consensus. So I shall accept that for the time being and judge the outcome when it becomes available.
Right. But you were talking about the partial success, and Ambassador Vinod Kumar, if I may come to you. Now, I'm looking at a list of, the agendas which have been tabled. Now, climate financing, food security, multilateral development, bank reforms, sustainable lending to the poor and the developing countries, whole lot of agenda is there. Now, if you have to look at it in terms of a partial success, of course, all eyes are on whether any consensus can be evolved on the Ukraine conflict or not, and whether there can be a deal which can be hammered where, Russia will allow Ukraine to ship its grains, because that is also another major issue which everyone is looking at. Now, if that happens, we do not know if at all it will happen, but if that happens, would that be called a partial success?
I would say that some of the issues that you have mentioned, if there is some language that we can say is forward-looking, I would call it a success. Second point is that some of these, of course, the specifics like how the grains are to be shipped and what is to happen in on the supply chain side, I think those are not going to be discussed here at the summit level. But if some language is there on which the leaders agree, that is forward-looking on the issues of development, on the issues of multilateral institutions, on the issues of climate financing, I would say that that in itself is a big success. And I have mentioned that earlier that G20 is not only an organization of 20 member nations, but it also is supposed to reflect the aspirations of other non-members as well. And of course, we have a number of countries who are invited as guests. But other than that, all the countries of the world, even small countries, would be looking at it as to what the leaders of these big economies are able to achieve. And I think if we meet some of their expectations, particularly in countries which are in Africa or which are facing crisis now, I would deem it as a success. For instance, just to give an example, that there are humanitarian crises everywhere, and somehow the international organizations and multilateral institutions have not been able to deal with them very well. And not only in Africa, but even in other parts of the world. So if there is some positive movement on that side, I would say that, yes, we have succeeded in something. Of course, the media and everyone is focused on what is going to be the Delhi Declaration, or is there going to be an outcome document? What is the language used for Ukraine? But other than these things, there are other issues also on which G20 should say that its success or failure of the summit would be measured against these markers, not only by the members of the G20, but also non-members as well, the larger international community.
Right. Anand, but when all these issues are being taken, alongside, whether it is Ukraine, whether it's climate financing, whether it's sustainable agriculture, what is your biggest fear when these, the dialogue and the deliberation starts, and the way media starts projecting it? Normally, we see that, of course, the main agenda is all eyes would be on what happens on Ukraine. So will other issues get overshadowed, or will there be something concrete which will come out only on Ukraine? Now, how would the media really project, given the fact that, there are so many issues to handle, and one issue probably might just become the center focus?
Well, we can't blame the media for focusing on a very important subject. In case the joint declaration, statement, communique eludes us, I hope it doesn't happen.
Right.
Then would you blame the media for talking about it, for keeping it somewhere in the center? You can't do so. So that's one aspect of it. Number two, the continuing relevance of the G20 forum. I go back to an earlier question that you had raised with me in the beginning. From what I'm reading, from what I'm hearing, the admission of the Africa bloc, 55-member Africa bloc, their admission to G20 as a member, not only as invited guests, that is likely to be on the cards, and the UN Secretary General has batted very strongly for it. I hope that comes through. And Africa coming in as regular members, as a bloc, like the European Union has, that says something, that speaks of a continuing confidence in the idea of a grouping like G20 dealing with international issues of an economic and developmental nature. So that will remain. Number three, I would say that even if a joint declaration is not concluded, chairman's summary will not take its place, and yet the chairman's summary will certainly have some positives in it. The various questions that you talked about, relating mostly to development in different fields of development. I'm not sanguine that there can be anything very major on the climate question. These are very difficult issues. I think the Western nations are not too eager, to lend a shoulder to solving that issue, nor are certain other non-Western nations, like Russia and China themselves, on the question of what to do with fossil fuels, coal. They're not about to give it up in a hurry. So that is a more intractable problem in that sense. So let us look at and for the time being be appreciative of the fact that even for those questions we have managed to take a few steps forward. Whether it is on the question of development banks, that again may not prove so easy, and yet doing something about it. I think India has sufficient expertise on the digital side, digital infrastructure, things of that kind. Those are definitely good steps to arrive at. And but as I said at the start, that this particular conference, this particular summit is taking place at a very unusual conjuncture, when the Cold War stance between Russia and the US and its allies is looking at us, staring at us in the face. Number two, China, which is the second most influential power in the world in terms of its military and economic projection, is not happy with India for reasons of its own making. We have not done anything to trouble China, but Chinese ambitions, along with its rise in the world, they seem to have gone ahead of those ambitions, and they are causing anxieties all around, not only in relation to India but other countries in the ASEAN. So this particular point in our history is something that cannot be disregarded. This will, on the whole, I'm not talking about this summit only, but this will be a troubling factor for international cooperation overall. And yet, we can't throw the baby with the bathwater. We can't say that the summit has been useless. Right. Now, having said it, I'd just like to say one more thing, which one of the panelists had spoken about quite rightly, that India is a democracy. India has been a democracy for 7.5 decades since independence. And that is one factor which attracted the world to it, in a big way, in spite of other constraints which faced India. On the democracy index, too, in recent times, there has been a slide. So that may not affect the economic financial outcomes or discussion on those. And yet in the minds of the world, the country of the global South, which has been the main champion in that entity, in that national country, in that national entity, there has been a slip in that undefinable, quantity called democracy, and that, so your voice will still carry weight. You're a very large country with a large population. You're knocking on the doors of the permanent membership of the Security Council. All of that is true. And yet even your neighbors will cock a snook at you, And some of these are police states that we are talking about. And yet to see you slip up somewhere where you were like a beacon at one point, that makes them happy, And then if they become parts of blocks which are inimical to you, then, there is not much to arrest them going on that path.
Right.
The one thing which we were really very strongly known for.
Right.
I think it's a pity. I'm sure that our leaders will pull it back. It is possible.
Right.
And then I think a great country with a great tradition like ours, there is no reason why we cannot actually set an example,
Right.
through our words, through our actions, through our contributions, through our negotiating ideas, whether they bear fruit in the immediate future or not.
Right.
When you give great ideas take time to fructify.
You
But
made,
there are always
yeah,
people who pay attention.
absolutely. You made some significant points, but from just taking a cue from what you said, Anand, and if I may ask Dakshin, and then I'll come for the concluding comments to Ambassador Bhatia and Ambassador Vinod. Dakshin, are we going to see, despite different blocks, being formed, are we going to see the beginning of another phase of Cold War, which apparently we do not know how to deal with? You'll have to unmute yourself, Dakshin. Yeah.
Though I don't want to sound pessimistic, the way the Ukraine-Russia war is going, the way China and India bickering on the border, the way the West and China, they seem to be going farther and farther apart. Well, I think we are on the cusp of a pretty sticky situation, and I just hope it doesn't really, slide into something of a crisis. You can call it Cold War. It could be or something else of a kind that we haven't seen before, because it can't be the exact replica of the past. But general tensions seem to be on the rise. And for instance, this war is causing so much of an issue in terms of food grain availability. It's thrown the world into a kind of an economic crisis. And the G20, mind you, is fundamentally an economic forum. And they have done good things in the past. For instance, after the 2008 economic, the global crash, they, of course, they really helped out the countries that were struggling.
Right.
Then you also had in COVID-19 pandemic, their interventions were extremely useful. So a group like the G20 is kind of rightly suited to be a counter to this kind of a degeneration that is likely to happen.
Right.
Given the kind of internal contradictions, I'm not sure which is going to prevail.
Okay.
Right.
So you're saying that you're not you don't want to sound so pessimistic, but Ambassador Bhatia, then would it be right to ask you that G20 Summit, of course, what the outcomes would be? It's too early to speculate on that as to what is going to be the outcome. But can I ask you this question, that probably it looks like the summit looks like a risk as well as an opportunity, both? You'll have to.
I would not at all.
Yes.
I
Yes,
would not at all feel a sense of pessimism at this stage. In fact, if anything, I notice this moment as the ultimate moment in which you are seeing very creative and proactive diplomacy by India on the world stage. There is absolutely no doubt that India is taken very seriously as a global player. The most important thing to note is that India is right now playing at least 3 major roles. First of all, it has represented or articulated the views of the global South or the developing world, calling itself as the voice of the global South. Secondly, it has also tried to work as a bridge between the North and South, the global North and the global South. I think India is one country where the Prime Minister can pick up the phone and talk to the White House, to Élysée Palace in France, and to almost any country leader in the world, especially in the global South. So there is a role as a bridge. On top of that, there is a third role, which is the role of a bridge between the East and the West. And here, if we talk of East as Russia and China, I think there is no problem. Prime Minister Modi has been talking to President Putin all the time. The moment President Putin decided that he cannot come, he personally called our Prime Minister. The only difficulty, and that too of somewhat recent origin, is the communication challenges between India and China. But as I said, even there, we can take heart from the fact that though the representation has been downgraded, Premier, the number 2 man in China, will be present here. So frankly, there is no particular cause for pessimism at all. As to the possibility of the Cold War, I think international relations scholars will continue to battle on this question, but I think they are all agreed that Cold War was a unique phenomenon of the post-war situation. There was the question of ideology. There was the question of nuclear weapons danger. There was also the question of building blocks. And there was a question of virtually no economic relationship between the East and the West. The situation today is very, very different. Even though US and China contest on a daily basis, they still have very close economic relations, almost of a large measure of mutual economic dependency. So in short, I would say that given the fact that G20 member states have already reached a consensus on a very large number of issues, on financial cooperation, on environment, on women-led development, and the rest of it. And yet there are differences that cannot be denied. So let us hope that it will culminate in a New Delhi declaration, and it will strengthen G20 and India's leadership role. But we cannot pronounce the final judgment until and unless the outcome is actually known to us.
Okay. So the final word to you, Ambassador Vinod, that whatever the outcomes are, even if it's a partial success, even if everything looks very, very watered down, but even then, Modi will be able to salvage something concrete for himself at the end of the summit.
Yeah, I would like to end on an optimistic note. And as far as the basic mandate of G20 is concerned, that is economic governance and building and sustaining global prosperity. And I am hopeful that we will have some good outcomes in that and forward-looking outcomes in this direction. And India, I think in the end, with its diplomatic skills, we should expect that perhaps something would come out that we all will be very proud of.
Well, the countdown has already begun. The traffic restrictions have kicked in and Delhi looks all decked up and decorated. So all eyes would be on what happens during the G20 summit. Thank you so much. It was wonderful having you on the program, Ambassador Bhatia, Ambassador Vinod Kumar, Anand, Dakshin. It was wonderful having all of you on the program. And one appeal to the viewers who are watching the Federal, subscribe to our channel, send us your feedback and stay tuned to the Federal. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.